So our latest webinar is going to be about the general public license, the GPL. We're going to be looking at how variants of the GPL exist in ways that are unexpected and may have implications for how we address license compliance around this license. We have research to present from Armijn Hemmel, who has been active in open source and especially open source compliance for decades now, and is one of the main figures doing the type of analysis, the type of research that helps us in a very practical way to manage open source license compliance in the global supply chain. If we want to delve into Armijn's background, we would have no time for the rest of the webinar. Suffice to say, he has been critical in validating how open source licensing can work in the legal system, in court cases. He's been critical in helping companies address everything from managing source code to binary code. And he's been critical in providing the type of process support that has been transformative around us. Armijn, I'm going to pass over to you for the rest of the story and to present your research around GPLv2 with one final note. The type of topic we have here today, where we look at something surprising around a license like GPL2 that can give us new ways to think about and perhaps even new concerns around a key license in the ecosystem, is a positive development. We're in a field where we need to understand, manage, and mitigate risk. The type of discourse where we find edges that are of potential concern, issues where we need to take note, are exactly the type of areas where we can optimize our approach to license compliance. We're very lucky to have this talk today. Armijn, thank you for being here. Looking forward to your presentation.
Oh gosh, thank you. That was a, how'd you say that? Glowing review. So what I'm going to do is actually a very nerdy topic today because I'm going to look at the licensing history, well, the history of the GPL version 2 license and all that. So you might wonder, like, why would we want to do something like this? And the thing is that this research does not originate with me. So it was started by Philippe Ombredan from NextB. You might know him from Scancode. And the background is that the Linux kernel wanted to switch to SPDX short identifiers and then just clean up the whole licensing situation a bit. But the proposed text that was used, so the proposed GPL text that was used, was not what FSF was using at the time. So people noticed, like, hey, this isn't the exact text that the FSF is using on their website. So maybe we should switch. So what Philip then did is he started to look into the variants of GPL2, and he came up with quite a few. So 6 different licenses, so 6 different versions that were used by FSF throughout history, and he added them to a Git repository. But that actually was just the start, because I noticed that Philip's work had some omissions. It was not complete. So for example, I knew that some of the wording in the HTML versions were different from the text versions that he had found and added to the Git repository. So what I did is I spent many evenings digging through the Internet Archive, comparing licensed texts and HTML versions side by side, going through the entire history to find all kinds of variants. I looked into the Linux kernel Git, just go through the entire history, and also the downloads of the Linux kernel, and also tarballs on the GNU download site for packages that are predating the Internet Archive. And so Philip and we did all of this work, and we were able to uncover many different versions. So of the vanilla GPL version 2, published by FSF and the GNU project, we found 40 different copies. Of the GPL version 2 with the Linux kernel linking exception as used in the Linux kernel, there are something like 12 different versions. And for Bash, which has an exception for interactive use, we found 2 copies. but we think we are complete now. But there are
Just
many, many versions.
just to interject there, so you found 40 of vanilla GPL and 12 of linking exception for Linux. So we're looking at 52 copies, not including the bash exception of the GPL2 from the official source.
Yeah, of course, the GPL2 in the Linux kernel is basically only in the Linux kernel Git and the tarballs. But yeah, something like 50 versions.
Hmm. Uh, that's quite a lot. And I'm sure the rest of your presentation will include some reasoning as to how that occurred and to what extent they're different. It was surprising for me when I first came across these numbers, especially regarding vanilla GPL2, 40 copies, that the variants are so high. Because as far as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, we haven't had a market insight into variants of GPL2 in its vanilla state existing before. It hasn't been communicated as a general thing.
No, so there are some reasons why there are so many so many versions, and I will go into that. But yeah, it's people are basically always talking about the GPL license or the GPL version 2 license, but there isn't a single one that is the canonical version. All right, so the changes, luckily, the changes in the text, they are only in the preamble and the appendix, but not the actual sections. So anything that is between, I'm not sure what it says, like the start of terms and conditions and the end of terms and conditions. Everything between that is identical between everything. But the changes are in the preamble and the appendix. So what happened is that FSF moved twice. So first they were I think at MIT, Massachusetts Avenue, then they moved to Temple Place, and then they moved to Franklin Street. There were some year 2000 issues in the original GPL version 2 license text. Also in the preamble and appendix, they make a reference to LGPL. And at some point, they went from library general public license to lesser general public license 2.1. And then there is just an endless stream of formatting differences. So when we did our research, we actually mostly ignored the formatting. But I think that the GPL version 2 license text was generated from some sort of uh, template documents or tech info or LaTeX or I don't know what. And from that, or MemPage, I have no idea. And from that, they generated a text version. Maybe DocBook, SGML, I have no idea. But so there are quite a few different versions because it seems like they regenerated the license text several times. But mostly we ignored the formatting changes because otherwise I think we would have been at 70, 80 versions, maybe more. So it seems that the changes to the license text were actually done in a bit of an ad hoc fashion. So at some point, when we found that GNU.org and FSF.org started to deviate from each other. So before that, they all used the same version. They published the same version of the license text. But at some point, they just started to diverging, and it seems like edits were done separately on both websites. So, for example, when they moved to Franklin Street, then on one of the website it said Franklin Street, like the full name. On the other side, it was Franklin ST, so the abbreviation of street. There would be things like USA dot versus USA, so without the dot, and the same for ink dot versus ink. And also what I saw is that when they changed the references to the LGPL, that on one website they did it in both the preamble and the appendix, and in the other one just in the appendix. Another change that is in the HTML versus the text version is that the Y2K problem was solved differently. So in the HTML, they would have four Ys, Y, 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 And in the text version, they would have angle bracket open, year, angle bracket closed. And what I also saw is that when new versions or new formats were introduced on the website, they sometimes introduced old problems. So the tech info version was never made fully Y2K compliant. So if you go to the FSF or the GNU website today and you download the tech info version of the GPL version 2, you will see that it has Y2K problems. The dogbook version, which was introduced not too long ago, actually never got the library to lesser change. So they're using a version which is years old. They just copied an old version into dogbook and then published it. Also, there were some changes where they started to use HTTPS in the URLs for LGPL. They fixed that in the HTML version in 2007, but in the other formats only 10 years later. And what I found is that there seems to have been no clear process or structure to make these changes. It just seemed all kind of random. That was very strange to see. So you might think like, why is this relevant? And the GPL version 2 license text actually says something that you're permitted to copy and distribute verbatim copies, but changing it is not allowed. Well, except for FSF, I guess. But what is more importantly, you need to give any recipients of the program a copy of this license along with the program. And this is mostly understood by people as a copy of GPL version 2. But really the question is which version, and does it have to be the newest, or does it have to be the one that is shipped with the software, or can you just pick any of the historical versions? And this is completely unclear. And there actually is some relevance to this because in 2007, there was a court case in Hamburg by, of course, our favorite troll, Patrick McHardy, where he argued that the company that he was going after had breached the license because they didn't ship the correct license text. In this case, it had omitted the section how to apply these terms to your new programs. And actually, the court decided that, yeah, the full license text should be shipped with the product. But if there are dozens of official versions, this is no easy answer. So not an easy question to answer. So which one? So this is definitely an open question, and I think that if you would take this to the logical conclusion, to what I think is the logical conclusion, which would mean that you would need to ship the license text as shipped with the program. I'm very sure that a lot of people will not be happy. They will not like this because it would mean that the disclosure documents would just explode. So the other GNU license texts suffer from similar issues. So when GPL version 3 was released, a page called Old Licenses was also introduced. And then GPL version 2 was, actually GPL version 1 was included on the website for the very first time because it predates the web by a few years. So what I saw is that the text version used Franklin Street and the HTML version used the original text of the GPL version 1 on Massachusetts Avenue. And it took them 2 more edits to get this right. So today it actually is correct, but it took them 2 edits to get it right. So I just don't understand it that they published an old license text in 2 different versions. It's in two different formats and 2 different versions. It just does not make sense. So I found that LGPL version 2.1 has at least 4 different versions. For GPL version 3, there are at least 2 versions. I still need to dig into LGPL2 and GFDL, that whole license family, because I just haven't had the time yet. So this made me wonder, so what does this say about FSF? So the FSF is, I would say, the legal guardian of the GPL license family, or the steward, you might say. So some of the people see them as the single source of truth regarding these licenses. But managing a fairly simple text document already seemed a little bit too much. I will let you draw your own conclusions, but yeah, it doesn't look too good, I would say. So if you would look at other license texts, so the official Apache 2 license text on apache.org, if you would go there today and you would go to the very first version that was recorded in the Internet Archive, they are identical. So the text version, same MD5 sum. You download both copies, exactly the same, completely identical. So they can get it right. Um, Also, there has been some interesting research. So in 2020, Jerome Seltzer published an article about the origin of the MIT license in a journal, which is a quite interesting read if you like license history. That also shows that, well, MIT license, there's also a lot of variation there. And I think that if you would start digging into the MIT license and all the different versions there, we would also have probably a much larger document or a much larger talk than what I talked about today. Also, what is quite interesting is Software Heritage. They published a data set with lots of licensed texts scraped from actual products and actual projects. So not just the official license texts, but what is used in projects. And that's an even bigger mess. So they did research. They published a paper about that at MSR 2020, so mining software repositories. And you can download that data set and do your own research. It's Just be warned, it's millions and millions of files. But that's also quite interesting. So if you're looking at the actual licenses used in projects, that's an even bigger mess. So, and basically Q&A. So since we're recording this and it's not really live, I don't think that we have many questions except for questions
I
from
have a
you.
few. I have a few. Well, I have the first one is the basic thing will be that any variants of licenses that aren't flagged can be a surprise, right? So it throws off our process if we assume this license with this title comes in one variant. And if there's more variants, we suddenly have to think our process around this is different. But the question I have relates to how different. From the presentation, it looks like most of the changes are fairly administrative. So they're not going to change the terms of the license. They might change the location of the creator of the license, like the address, etc. So my question is anything you've seen so far going to require a large policy shift, a large process change, or are we basically looking at a memo? There were lots of administrative changes around the license, but the terms are the same.
I would say the latter. It's mostly annoying because if you have a scanner and your scanner only can correctly identify one of the versions, you will have a lot of extra work going through curating the other ones and saying, well, look, okay, well, this actually it really is another version of GPL version 2. So it's mostly annoying, I would say. Um,
I
it
mean,
is yeah, well, it should be fairly easy for the tool vendors to just load all of the versions into their knowledge base and just be done with it.
which was the next question, which is, is it going to be difficult to address this with automation? It sounds like as long as there's a profile understanding, you're fine. But if someone checked, is this GPL2 by cross-checking, is the address of the licensing org correct? Then you could throw an error when suddenly the address is different. So, you need to have awareness in the tooling that the variants exist to ensure that they don't get confused and you don't get confused.
Yeah, I think that the biggest challenge is basically what happened in Hamburg, so in 2017, where a court that is not aware of all of these variants basically decides like, yeah, you need to provide the license text, and then there is just so much wiggling room for a troll. you can then just say, well, you're not providing the license text because the license text was slightly different. So that's where I see the issues mostly pop up.
Right.
That
And
there will be malicious actors trying to take advantage of this.
it would be easy perhaps to brush it off as, well, this is trivial, but then our experience with Patrick McCarty shows that the most trivial thing can be pounced on by a determined troll to say, oh, you were very close, but.
Indeed.
Now, kind of my final question, which is around this, is now that we know that there are so many variants, but we know that the changes aren't to the terms of the license, but they do change the fact that this ABC license is ABC version 23 or whatever. We can fix it with tooling. Do you think that we are also in a situation where we need to have briefing material for outside parties? Would it be something that, courts will need to have briefing material to explain this, so that if they ever have something come up where a troll jumps, the court can say, despite the ruling in Hamburg, we should understand clearly that there are some variants of the GPL, but they aren't material variants of the GPL, et cetera, et cetera? Or is that thinking too deeply? Is this a problem where we just encourage the tooling to have a little bit of better checking so it doesn't throw an error, and we call it a day? And if and when something happens, we can address it then.
Nope. It's a little bit like an insurance, right? So if you're facing a troll and you need to pull that document out within minutes, that's probably better than if you have to do all of that research and then finding out like, hey, there are all these variants. So, but I think that this can basically be a two-pager or something.
And arguably, even the existence of this webinar is a step towards pointing to that this is a known issue. Here's what it is. Here's what matters, and here's what doesn't matter about it.
Yeah, that's I would concur. But I do want to say one other thing is that if you would look into the so for the official license text, this is all correct. But if you start looking at the texts from actual projects, then there will be sometimes a few surprises where the license conditions have been changed. So I actually found GPL version 2 license texts with extra terms and conditions, but never in the official versions. So the pane where you will find license texts that are different could be in the projects. Luckily, not in the projects that are used a lot, but they do exist. They definitely do exist.
This takes us to a almost counterintuitive point, which is where we sort of started with concerns about the sheer number of official variants. Then we talked about what that means in practice, which is it's mostly administrative. And now we're looking at a situation where outside of official licenses or very mainstream projects, we do have forks of GPL with different terms. But it seems one message to take away is don't conflate that with the existence of the official variants. So if someone was to say, oh, I found a GPL version that is totally different and there's like 70 versions of the GPL, we should probably be like, whoa there. You are correct that there's 40 vanilla versions, there's 12 versions in the Linux kernel, but those aren't material changes, they're administrative changes. And when there's a version that is a genuine change, we do have to really reconsider our policy and process around what that means in that project. But for the official variants, what we need is to understand that they exist and what they mean, and be able to communicate that clearly, which is usually their administrative variants. It's perhaps irritating, but it doesn't mean that your licensing terms just changed.
I would agree.
This is super important because this could be used in different directions. It could be used for people to say, it doesn't matter that there's variance, it matters. It could be used for people to say there's a catastrophically large amount of variance. there's a large amount, but what they do in the variance usually isn't that severe. So it's one of those, let's deal with the gray reality rather than any black and white drama.
Yep.
Armine, thank you. This is very useful. I know that a lot of our audience will perhaps not be used to suddenly diving into something like this. But again, the policy and process implications are large. We need to look at topics like this. We need to have a strategy. This type of research is invaluable to indicate the type of challenges the market faces and to indicate our path through them. This research has provided a remarkable insight into official variants of the GPL, thanks to what Philip started and Armine continued.
And it's all in the Git repository.
It's all there.
It's all there.
You guys certainly dug up a very interesting hornet's nest there. I would never have thought intuitively there were so many official variants of GPL. And to communicate this clearly and to deal with the fact that they exist, but it's different from a forked term set, is, I think, a really key thing that we have on our radar. All right, we're going to wrap it up there. Armine, thank you once again for giving us another analysis, which helps with
My
the
pleasure.
large-scale market stuff. Listen, I'm going to talk with you soon. We do hope to have you back for another webinar. And in the meantime, everyone, if you have questions, our mailing list, our calls, or direct emails can be used to contact us and to contact Armine to delve further into this topic. Have a beautiful day. Stay safe. Stay well.